"You're 30 seconds late," Cassandra snapped the moment she stepped onto the jet. "That may fly in commercial, but in the private world, we expect a higher standard." She stepped inside the private plane like she owned the air itself, sat and crossed her legs, opened her tablet with one hand, while waving the other behind her dismissively. "That's fine, Harper," she said. "Sit anywhere. We won't be talking." Her assistant climbed in quietly behind her, cheeks already flushed. The pilot that just had been humiliated walks into the jet. That man was Dean Walker. He didn't just fly the plane, he owned it. The jet, the company, the hangar it rolled out of, all his. He piloted by choice, for the joy of it. But to Cassandra Langley didn't know that. For her, he was just another man in a uniform. Dean gave a small nod. "Good morning, Ms. Langley." Cassandra didn't even look up. "Let's just get this over with. I have a meeting in 3 hours, and turbulence better not be on the agenda." Dean said nothing, just turned toward the controls, fingers steady, expression calm. She had made her entrance, and her judgment, and for now, that was all he needed to know. The private jet cut smoothly through the cold morning sky, clouds parting in wisps outside the narrow windows. Inside the cabin, silence hung heavier than the altitude. Cassandra sat upright, legs crossed, stylus tapping rhythmically against her tablet. Her brows furrowed with irritation as she scrolled through a poorly formatted investor deck. Across from her, Harper had fallen asleep, her head tilted awkwardly against the plush leather seat, mouth slightly open. The only other sound was the soft whir of the engines, and the occasional sigh of frustration from Cassandra. Another missed comma, another lazy title slide, another reason she was always the one cleaning up after everyone else. She didn't look up when Dean's voice came softly over the intercom. "This is your captain. We'll be leveling off at 13,000 feet for the remainder of the short flight. Slight wind shear reported over the city. We may hit a pocket of turbulence, but it should pass quickly." Cassandra glanced up sharply at the word turbulence. "Of course," she muttered, pulling her seatbelt tighter. "First he's late. Now we're getting bounced around." A second later, the plane dipped slightly, a natural, harmless movement. But Cassandra stiffened, one hand gripping the edge of her armrest. Dean made a few minor adjustments in the cockpit, eyes steady on the gauges. The aircraft's movement steadied within moments. Cassandra called out without even looking toward the front. "Do you plan to land us smoothly, or is this part of the rustic luxury experience?" Dean's voice came back through the speaker, calm, professional. That was standard atmospheric variation, perfectly safe. She raised her voice just enough to carry. "Safe doesn't mean comfortable." Dean didn't respond this time. The intercom remained silent, not even static. Cassandra sat back, a little harder than necessary, and tapped her stylus against her tablet like a drumbeat of dissatisfaction. Harper glanced sideways, but didn't say anything. She'd learned that when Cassandra was in this mood, silence was usually the safer co-pilot. The jet sailed smoothly now, gliding with mechanical grace through the final stretch of open air. The turbulence had long passed, but Cassandra hadn't unclenched her jaw. She didn't like being unsettled. She especially didn't like being ignored. "He's not even trying to apologize," Cassandra muttered under her breath. Harper, tired and cautious, offered a diplomatic answer. "I don't think he did anything wrong." "That's not the point," Cassandra replied. "The point is, in private service, experience isn't the product. Attentiveness is. This is basic luxury etiquette." Harper nodded slightly, though her eyes had already drifted back to the clouds. Cassandra stared straight ahead. Dean's voice eventually returned over the speaker, calm as ever. "Final descent beginning, arrival in approximately 8 minutes." The plane dipped smoothly, the skyline of Manhattan slowly rising in the distance like a steel and glass mirage. Cassandra watched it through the window, her reflection faint in the glass, perfect makeup, perfect posture, perfectly annoyed. She caught herself adjusting her hair, fixing the lapel of her blazer. Why? He wasn't even looking at her. 6 minutes later, the jet kissed the runway so lightly it could have been mistaken for a breeze. The landing was perfect. No bounce, no hard brake, not a single rattle. just stillness, as if they'd never moved at all. Dean taxied them toward a reserved terminal space. The hum of the engines softened. Then a soft ding. "You may now gather your belongings," came Dean's voice. "It's been a pleasure having you aboard." Cassandra stood immediately and reached for her bag without comment. Harper followed. Dean opened the cabin door himself and stood aside to let them exit. Cassandra paused at the top of the stairs, just for a moment. She didn't say thank you, just gave him a look. One part evaluation, one part dismissal. The way you might glance at a bartender who made the drink correctly but didn't make it memorable. Dean didn't flinch. He held the door, silent. Cassandra stepped down onto the tarmac without another word. Harper, a few paces behind, gave Dean a small smile. "Thank you, Captain." He returned the nod. "Safe travels." Then he stepped back into the jet and pulled the door shut behind him. No ego. No need to correct her. No need to remind her who he really was. That part would come soon enough. 3 days later, Cassandra Langley stepped into the shimmering marble lobby of one of Manhattan's most exclusive private aviation firms, clutching her tablet like a weapon and wearing a steel blue power suit that matched her mood. "Langley Group for the 11 of pitch," she told the receptionist, without pausing to smile. The young woman behind the desk tapped something into her system, then stood. "Yes, Ms. Langley. You're in conference room 2, right this way." Cassandra followed without a word, Harper a step behind her, eyes wide at the sheer luxury of the place. Tall glass windows with sweeping views of the Hudson, brushed gold trim on the elevator doors, a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a palace rather than an office building. "They've got taste," Harper whispered. "They've got money," Cassandra corrected, her voice clipped. "Let's hope they have vision." They turned a corner, and the receptionist gestured toward a heavy frosted glass door with a bronze handle. "They're already inside. Good luck." Cassandra didn't need luck. She had strategy. She pushed open the door without hesitation, ready to own the room, and froze. Sitting at the head of the table, dressed not in a flight suit but in a tailored black suit with an open-collar shirt, was Dean Walker. No stubble, no headset, no uniform. Just him, calm, polished, and unmistakably in charge. He looked up the moment she walked in. Their eyes met. For a second, the whole room tilted. Cassandra didn't blink, didn't breathe. Dean stood slowly and extended a hand. "Ms. Langley, welcome." She shook it, hand stiff. "Mr. Walker." "Please," he said smoothly. "Just Dean." Her brain flipped through 1,000 files at once. The man she'd snapped at, dismissed, mocked. He wasn't a pilot for hire. He was the billionaire owner of the very company she was here to pitch. And he had said nothing. He had let her unravel in front of him, calmly and silently. She sat down with practiced elegance, pretending she wasn't internally combusting. Harper took the seat next to her, shooting a wide-eyed glance she didn't dare speak aloud. Dean resumed his place at the head of the table. Beside him sat a panel of 3 executives, the chief marketing officer, the director of philanthropy, and someone from investor relations. All of them looked relaxed, confident, like they knew exactly who was in charge, and it wasn't her. Cassandra cleared her throat and launched into her presentation with icy precision. "Langley Group specializes in bespoke brand repositioning for legacy," she started. She spoke cleanly. Her slides were perfect. Her words landed like sharpened blades. But she could feel Dean watching her, not judging, just observing, like a man who'd seen enough surface polish to know when it didn't go deep. She kept going. "We believe you can own both sides of that brand, the one that delivers luxury at scale and the one that inspires loyalty through storytelling." Her voice softened, just slightly. "We don't sell what you do. We sell how it makes people feel." She clicked to the final slide and sat back. Silence. Then Dean nodded. "Impressive presentation." Cassandra gave a tight smile. "We aim for nothing less." Dean leaned back in his chair, eyes still on her. "Tell me, Miss Langley, do you always believe in the power of first impressions?" Her stomach dropped. But she smiled coolly. Only when I'm making them. He didn't smile. Interesting. One of the executives broke the tension. We'll be discussing internally this week. Very strong proposal. Cassandra nodded and stood. Thank you for your time. Dean remained seated. Have a good afternoon. Cassandra turned and walked out, not waiting for Harper, not saying another word. But the second they were back in the elevator, Harper whispered, "That's him, isn't it?" Cassandra didn't answer. She didn't need to. Outside, the cold February wind stung her face as they stepped onto the sidewalk. Harper looked at her, hesitant. "Are you okay?" Cassandra exhaled. "I just pitched a man I treated like a minimum-wage chauffeur." Harper didn't say anything. "I called him late. I mocked his job. I said flying was button-pushing." Still silence. "I basically told Elon Musk he had no presence." Harper blinked. "To be fair, you didn't know he was—" "That's not the point," Cassandra snapped. "I didn't care who he was. I didn't care enough to ask. That's the problem." They stood there for a long moment, people bustling past them on the sidewalk. Harper finally spoke. "Well, you were impressive in there." Cassandra gave a dry laugh. He wasn't impressed. Later that night, Cassandra sat on the edge of her sofa, the skyline glittering outside her penthouse window. She'd poured a glass of wine and left it untouched. She kept replaying the look on Dean's face. Not smug, not angry, just measured, controlled, like he'd already seen her type before and filed her away without malice. She hated that more than if he'd thrown her out of the room. She opened her laptop and stared at the company website again. Walker Aero. Dean Walker. Former military pilot. Decorated. Quietly philanthropic. Kept his name out of the press unless it was tied to aviation innovation or educational grants. There was nothing flashy. No scandals. No headlines. Just competence wrapped in restraint. And beneath it all, restraint that reminded her she'd underestimated someone who had absolutely no need to play the game she lived by. She closed the laptop, then reopened it, then shut it again. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure how to repair something, because she wasn't sure she'd broken it in the first place. She had acted exactly how she always acted, and that was the problem. The next day, Harper peeked her head into Cassandra's office. He emailed. Cassandra looked up. "What?" "Dean Walker, his assistant, technically. They want to circle back on the pitch." Cassandra swallowed. "They're giving us another meeting?" Harper nodded. Friday morning. Cassandra leaned back in her chair, processing. "You okay?" Harper asked. "I don't know," Cassandra said honestly. "I thought he was done with me." Harper smiled. "Maybe he's not." Cassandra stared out the window, into the gray-blue horizon. Or maybe, she thought, he just wanted to see what she'd do next. Cassandra Langley rehearsed the apology 6 times before she even got out of the car. She didn't call it an apology, of course, not in front of Harper. Out loud it was just tone management, or narrative control. But deep down, she knew exactly what it was. She had messed up, and she hated how much it mattered that he knew she knew it. The Friday morning meeting was set for 9:30. She arrived at 9:20, dressed deliberately in a softer color palette, cream and charcoal. Still sharp, still expensive, but calculated to disarm. She'd even worn flats, no echoing heels this time. Harper walked beside her in silence as they entered the lobby. "Are you ready?" Harper asked gently. Cassandra glanced at her and replied, "No, but I'm prepared." Harper offered a small, encouraging smile. "He might surprise you." Cassandra kept her expression neutral. "He already did." A different assistant, not the one from last time, waved them into conference room 1 without a word. No warm greeting, no chit-chat. When Cassandra stepped inside, Dean Walker was already there, standing alone near the large window, hands loosely in his pockets. He didn't turn when the door opened. He didn't greet her. Cassandra cleared her throat. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." Dean turned calmly. "Ms. Langley," he said, "please have a seat." His voice was polite but guarded, like someone who had already finished the conversation in his head before it ever started out loud. Cassandra sat down across from him, trying to match his calm. Harper followed, her presence quiet but supportive. Dean walked back to his seat and sat across from Cassandra. There were no executives in the room this time, no board members, just the three of them. Cassandra folded her hands on the table and began, her voice steady. "I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to meet again," Cassandra said. "I realize that during our last interaction, I may have misread the room." Dean didn't react. "You gave a solid presentation," he replied. Cassandra gave a tight smile. "Yes, but I think it's important to acknowledge that before the presentation, there was a flight." Dean tilted his head slightly but said nothing. Cassandra continued, "I wasn't at my best that day, and I didn't treat you with the respect you deserved." Dean let a pause hang between them. Then he nodded. "You were honest." Cassandra blinked, unsure what to do with that. "I was dismissive," she admitted. Dean looked her in the eyes now. "That too." Cassandra exhaled, bracing herself. "I misjudged you." Dean's voice remained steady. "You didn't just misjudge me, Cassandra. You dismissed me." Her breath caught. It was the truth, clean and undeniable. "I know," Cassandra said quietly. Dean sat back slightly in his chair. "I wasn't offended." Cassandra looked at him, cautiously hopeful. "Then why—" Dean interrupted. "But I was disappointed." The words landed sharply, not cruelly, just with weight. Cassandra nodded slowly. "Thank you for being honest." Dean kept his gaze on her. "I've been in your position before," he said. "I know what it feels like to walk into a room thinking you're the smartest one in it. It gives you momentum, but it also blinds you." Cassandra didn't deflect. She didn't defend. "I've built my career on control," Cassandra replied. "But somewhere along the way, I think I started confusing being prepared with being protected." Dean studied her. His voice softened just slightly. "I believe people are more than their worst moments," Dean said. "But I don't believe they're entitled to erase them." Cassandra looked down at her folded hands, then back up. "I'm not trying to erase anything," she said. I want to do better." Dean stood without ceremony. "The proposal is under review," he said. Cassandra stood as well. "That's it?" Dean met her gaze. "That's enough." Then he walked out of the room. Back in the elevator, Cassandra stared at the floor as they descended. Harper hesitated before speaking. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No," Cassandra said quickly. They exited the building and stepped into the brisk Manhattan morning. The sky was pale, windless, and far too still for how loud her thoughts were. Harper broke the silence as their car pulled up to the curb. "You were honest in there," Harper said. "That's more than most people ever are." Cassandra climbed into the car without answering. As the door closed behind them, Harper tried again. "He heard you. I think he just isn't ready to respond." Cassandra looked out the window. "I didn't expect grace," she said, "but I thought he'd at least acknowledge the effort." Harper kept her voice low. "Maybe he did, just not in the way you wanted." Cassandra turned sharply. "I need more than silence, Harper. I need clarity." "Maybe," Harper replied carefully, "you're not supposed to get clarity right now. Maybe you're supposed to sit with discomfort for once." Cassandra didn't answer. She just looked out the window and listened to the city pass her by. That weekend, Cassandra didn't leave the office. She didn't work either. Not really. She sat on the floor of her corner office, legs crossed in slacks she hadn't changed out of, sipping cold espresso and staring at Dean's file on her laptop. Walker Arrow's media profile was thin, which she already knew. Dean's was thinner. A few official interviews, some vague bios. A military past, a quiet business empire, and a clear distaste for public attention. She read and reread one quote from a 2018 article. "People think silence means I have something to hide. It doesn't. It means I don't owe anyone a performance." She stared at that line for a long time. Her tablet buzzed with messages, clients, invitations, reminders, but she ignored them all. Her silence, she realized, had always been strategic, calculated, a pause between 2 points of persuasion. His silence wasn't performance. It was integrity. By Tuesday, she'd still heard nothing. No updates, no emails, no rejection, no approval, nothing. Cassandra tried to act like it didn't bother her, but Harper noticed the way she kept refreshing her inbox every hour. Finally, on Wednesday, Cassandra said, "Just reach out. Ask politely where they are in the process." Harper nodded and made the call. She returned a few minutes later. His assistant said they're still reviewing. Cassandra sat back. "That's not a yes." "No," Harper agreed, "but it's not a no." Cassandra closed her eyes. It was worse than no. It was indifference. Thursday night, Harper invited her to a rooftop charity gala hosted by one of their mutual clients. Normally, Cassandra would have passed the invitation to someone junior. She didn't like events where she wasn't in control of the room. But this time, she said yes. They arrived just after 7. The rooftop was lined with glowing heaters, soft jazz played in the background, and Manhattan shimmered around them like an audience. Cassandra wore a sleek black dress with long sleeves and her hair pulled back. She didn't expect to see Dean Walker, but she heard his name. "Dean's supposed to stop by," a woman near the bar was saying. "He only shows up when the charity actually does something useful." Cassandra tensed. Harper saw the shift in her posture. "He's here?" Harper asked. Cassandra didn't respond. 10 minutes later, Dean arrived. He wasn't wearing a tux or making an entrance. Just a simple, sharp black suit, no tie, no fanfare. He moved through the room with purpose, nodding politely, shaking hands briefly, never lingering. He hadn't seen her yet. Cassandra turned to Harper and asked quietly, "What would I even say?" Harper shrugged. "Maybe nothing. Or maybe the truth." Cassandra was still debating when the decision was made for her. A server bumped into someone near the bar, and a full glass of champagne sloshed across Dean's sleeve. He stepped back instinctively, brushing off the liquid. Cassandra crossed the room before she could second-guess herself. Dean was already waving off the server politely when she approached. "I think the universe might be trying to humble us both," Cassandra said, stepping to his side. Dean looked over slowly. "Ms. Langley." She smiled softly. "Just Cassandra tonight." Dean raised an eyebrow. "You clean up well." "You too," Cassandra said. They stood in a brief silence. Cassandra broke it first. "I wanted to apologize again." Dean's tone was even. "I heard you the first time." "I know," Cassandra said, "but I wanted to say it without an audience." Dean studied her for a moment. "Why does my opinion matter so much to you?" Cassandra hesitated. "It's not that I need you to like me. It's that I want you to see I'm more than the worst version of me." Dean didn't blink. "I don't think you're the worst version," he said. "I think you're the most rehearsed." Cassandra looked down, caught off guard by the accuracy. "I don't know how else to be," she admitted quietly. Dean didn't reply immediately, but his expression shifted. Not warmth, not forgiveness, but something. Curiosity. The charity gala wasn't supposed to matter. It was one of dozens Cassandra attended each year, a networking event cloaked in causes, where photos were taken more than checks were written. But this one felt different the moment she stepped into the ballroom. It was the lighting, warmer than usual, the music, softer, or maybe it was just the fact that her nerves had started buzzing before she even reached the table. Harper walked a step behind her, checking the name cards. "Table 7. Cassandra scanned the crowd. Everything gleamed. The gold accents on the white tablecloths, the perfectly polished crystal, the towering floral centerpieces like small jungles blooming from the center of every table. Cameras flashed discreetly in the corners. Waitstaff moved in crisp choreography. Then she saw him. Dean Walker stood on the far side of the ballroom, dressed in charcoal gray. No tie. Hands in his pockets, listening to someone speak. He looked like he didn't belong, and somehow like he owned the room. Cassandra swallowed hard. "Of course," she murmured. Harper looked up. "What?" Cassandra didn't answer. She already knew what was coming next. When they reached table 7, the name cards were exactly where fate wanted them. Cassandra Langley, Dean Walker, side by side. Cassandra exhaled through her nose. "Brilliant." Harper raised her eyebrows. "You okay?" "I'm always okay," Cassandra said automatically. She pulled out her chair with unnecessary grace and sat. Moments later, Dean approached. He looked at the table, then at her. "Well," Dean said, "looks like we meet again." Cassandra kept her voice light. "Should I be flattered or terrified?" Dean pulled out his chair. "I'd say neither. It wasn't my seating chart." He sat beside her. They didn't shake hands. They didn't smile. But they didn't move apart either. Dinner began slowly, with waiters placing down appetizers like museum pieces. The other guests at the table, CEOs, consultants, and an actress from a streaming series, all introduced themselves with smooth polish. Conversation moved like champagne, light, effervescent, and quickly forgotten. Cassandra barely participated. Dean didn't say much either. They both listened more than they spoke. It wasn't until the main course arrived that anyone addressed them directly. A woman across the table leaned in. "You two know each other?" Cassandra responded first. "We've crossed paths professionally." Dean nodded once. "Yes, a few shared projects." The woman smiled. "That must make events like this less awkward," Dean replied. "Sometimes it makes them more." Cassandra smirked into her wineglass. "He's not wrong." The woman laughed and turned her attention to someone else. Dean looked over at Cassandra. "You handled that well." "I've had practice," Cassandra replied. "Do you enjoy these things?" Dean asked. "No," Cassandra said, "but I'm very good at pretending I do." Dean gave a soft laugh, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That I believe." Cassandra glanced at him, then back at her plate. "And you? You don't seem the gala type." "I'm not," Dean said, "but I support the cause." "Do you always show up for the things you support?" she asked. Dean looked down at his fork. "Not always." The air between them shifted slightly, less guarded, more tentative. Later, as dessert arrived and the noise in the room grew louder with cocktails and donations, Cassandra leaned toward Dean. "I owe you something," Cassandra said, keeping her voice low. Dean didn't look at her. "You already said your piece." "I did," Cassandra agreed, "but you didn't believe it." Dean finally turned toward her. "It's not about belief, it's about timing." Cassandra narrowed her eyes. "You don't think people can change?" Dean shook his head. "I think people change all the time, but not always for the reasons they think." "What reason do you think I have?" Cassandra asked. Dean held her gaze. "You're used to fixing things. You can't stand the idea of someone seeing you and not being impressed." Cassandra stiffened. "That's not fair." "It's not wrong," Dean said quietly. Cassandra looked away. Her voice was sharper now. "You don't know me well enough to make declarations like that." Dean responded calmly. "No, but I've been where you are. High ground gets lonely." That stopped her. She turned back slowly. "What do you mean?" Dean didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, "Why did you really come tonight?" Cassandra hesitated. "Because I said yes to the invitation." Dean raised an eyebrow. Cassandra smiled faintly. "Because I didn't want to keep avoiding places where you might be." Dean tilted his head. "Why?" "Because I don't like the version of myself you've seen," Cassandra said, "and I don't like the idea that you're the only one who's seen it." Dean looked at her for a long time. He didn't respond, and that silence said more than words. As the auction began and the ballroom lights dimmed, they fell into a different rhythm. Cassandra wasn't trying to perform. Dean wasn't trying to disappear. They just sat beside each other, quiet, occasionally exchanging remarks that didn't carry the same sharp edges as before. It wasn't exactly chemistry. It was curiosity. Cassandra leaned over at one point and whispered, "What's the most expensive thing you've ever bought that didn't make you happy?" Dean didn't pause. "A 6-story townhouse in London." Cassandra smiled. "Let me guess. Cold, echoing, and beautiful?" Dean nodded. "Exactly." "Same," Cassandra said, "except it was a penthouse in Tribeca." Dean turned to her. "Did you sell it?" "No," Cassandra said. "I just stopped going home." He looked at her more closely now. The armor was still there, but it was worn thinner than before. Cassandra changed the subject. "What about the most meaningful thing you ever spent money on?" Dean glanced down at his wrist, at a watch with a scratched leather band. A flying lesson, 23 years ago. I didn't eat for 2 days after because I was broke, but I never felt more full. Cassandra didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "That's beautiful." Dean replied, "It was terrifying." By the end of the night, their chairs had shifted closer. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough that Cassandra could feel his presence more clearly. As the final applause rippled through the room and people stood to gather their coats, Dean stood too. Cassandra rose beside him. Dean looked at her, then said, "It's late. Let me walk you out." Cassandra blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," Dean said. "I want to." They walked through the quiet halls of the hotel, past empty lounges and marble sculptures, until they reached the street. The cold air was sharp, but clean. Cassandra's car was waiting. So was Harper, already seated inside. Dean turned to her at the curb. "You don't owe me anything, Cassandra." She looked up at him. "That's not how I feel." Dean nodded once. "I'm still not sure who you are underneath all of it." Cassandra stepped forward just slightly. "Then maybe let me show you." Dean didn't smile, but his voice softened. "Maybe," he said. "Not tonight, but maybe." She nodded. He opened the door for her, and she stepped inside. As the car pulled away, Cassandra turned to look out the window, watching him shrink into the Manhattan night. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she'd lost. She felt seen, and that terrified her more than anything else. Dean Walker never made a habit of Googling people after meetings. He didn't like the idea of research replacing instinct. He believed in eye contact, not headlines. In what people didn't say. He preferred to learn people slowly, like landscapes, instead of pulling up a blueprint and pretending it explained the shape of the ground. But that night, after the gala, something pulled at him. He sat at his desk in his quiet downtown apartment, untouched whiskey on the table beside him, and opened his laptop. He typed her name, Cassandra Langley, not the press page version, the kind that came up on business websites and fashion blog interviews. He scrolled past those, past the Forbes profile and the Fast Company Q&A, past the Women to Watch headline and the photos of her in blazers worth more than most apartments. He went deeper. He searched by date, and that's when he found it. Cassandra Langley, wins state debate on financial aid reform, 2006. There was a picture, same eyes, same posture, but younger, shoulders curled slightly inward, hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. No polish, no pretense. She stood holding a cheap certificate beside a woman in a nurse's uniform, her mother, probably. The article mentioned it, raised by a single mom who worked nights at Mercy Hospital. The win earned her a scholarship that led to her Ivy League acceptance. That, Dean realized, was the first domino. He clicked another link. Langley's first-gen journey, a student blog from her college's alumni site. She didn't write it, someone else did. But it quoted her. "I don't come from wealth, but I know how to talk to it, I understand it, and I know what it needs to hear." Dean sat back. She hadn't just worked her way into the world of luxury. She'd studied it like a second language, worn it like armor, used it like camouflage. A few days later, Dean had a meeting at a regional hospital near the Bronx. Walker Arrow had just funded a transport drone program for emergency medicine. As he was walking through the lobby, thanking the staff and posing for a rare donor photo, something caught his eye. In the corner of the hospital waiting room was a modest little coffee stand. Nothing fancy, just foam cups and an aging espresso machine. And behind it stood Cassandra Langley, not in heels, not in a suit, in jeans, a sweater, hair tied back. She wasn't working the coffee stand. She was standing next to a man in a worn sweater vest and slippers, his face hollow from age and illness. She was talking to him quietly, helping him with his tea. His hands shook and she steadied them. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small pack of cookies, and gave them to him with the gentleness of someone who had done it 100 times before. Dean stood half-shielded behind a wall. He didn't approach, he watched. The man was her father. Dean didn't need to be told. He could see it in the way she looked at him, not with affection, but with something heavier. Obligation, distance, maybe pain, maybe forgiveness she hadn't figured out how to give. Cassandra sat beside him on the vinyl waiting room chair and opened a photo album from her bag. She pointed to a picture, smiled faintly. He nodded. His hand trembled on her wrist. She let him hold it. Then she quietly kissed his temple and stood to leave. Dean turned away before she saw him. 2 days later, she texted him, "There's a cafe in Chelsea with terrible lighting and good pastries. Come with me." He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "When?" Cassandra replied, "Now. I'm already here." The cafe was tucked on a corner across from a bookstore that hadn't changed its window display in 10 years. The lights were soft but awkward, casting shadows under everyone's eyes. The pastries were displayed behind slightly fogged glass. A single barista hummed along to Ella Fitzgerald in the back. Cassandra sat near the window in a wool coat and black turtleneck, her laptop closed, untouched cappuccino in front of her. When Dean walked in, she looked up and smiled. Not the glossy kind she wore at events, a smaller one, like she didn't know what to expect but hoped it might be kind. Dean sat across from her. Cassandra spoke first. "I didn't expect you to say yes." Dean shrugged. "I didn't expect the invitation." Cassandra took a sip of her drink. "I like this place. Nobody takes pictures of their food here. It's like being invisible." Dean glanced around. "You like being invisible?" Cassandra replied. "I like choosing when I'm visible." Dean nodded slowly. "That's fair." They sat in a quiet that wasn't uncomfortable. Finally, Cassandra broke it. "I saw you at the hospital," she said softly. "I knew you were there." Dean didn't pretend to be surprised. Cassandra continued, "I wasn't going to say anything, but now I'm glad you saw it." Dean met her gaze. "Is he your father?" Cassandra nodded once. "He left when I was 11, didn't call for 10 years, showed up when I was in grad school, broke, sick, and convinced he still mattered." Dean asked, "Does he?" Cassandra hesitated. "He does now, because I let him." Dean's voice was quiet. "Why?" "Because if I only gave to people who earned it," Cassandra said, "I'd have nothing left in me to give." Dean didn't speak. He just looked at her. Really looked. Cassandra continued, "My mother raised me alone. She worked doubles. I barely saw her, but she made sure I had clean shoes and clean grades. I went to school with kids whose dads ran hedge funds and flew helicopters to the Hamptons. I learned how to talk like them, dress like them, beat them at their own games." She smiled faintly. "But I never forgot the difference between becoming something and escaping something." Dean leaned forward. "So which one did you do?" Cassandra looked out the window. "Some days I don't know." Dean nodded slowly. "I think you're still deciding." She turned back to him. "Maybe, but I know I'm not the woman you met on that flight." Dean said gently, "That woman was scared." Cassandra replied, "That woman was arrogant." Dean shook his head. "Arrogance is fear wearing heels." That made her laugh. "You always talk like that?" Dean smiled. "Only when I mean it." They stayed there for another hour. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood, loyalty, why some people never apologize and why others never stop, why silence can be either a weapon or a kindness depending on how you use it. Dean told her about his late wife, not the whole story, but enough to leave a weight in the air between them. Cassandra didn't fill the silence, she just nodded, and that said more than any condolence ever could. When they finally stood to leave, Cassandra touched Dean's arm lightly. "I'm not trying to be someone you admire," she said. "I just don't want to be someone you regret letting into your life." Dean looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You're not." She blinked. "Not yet." "No," Dean said. "Not at all." They stepped into the cold, and this time they walked in the same direction, side by side. A few days later, Cassandra saw the Youth Flight Academy for the first time. It didn't look like much, a small cluster of hangars on the edge of a field, a single faded sign that read, "Walker Aero Youth Initiative," no marble entrance, no donor's wall, no one taking photos, Just wind, sky, and kids in matching blue polo shirts learning how to move things bigger than themselves. Dean stood near one of the aircrafts, pointing out structural details to a group of teenagers. He didn't notice her at first, or maybe he did and just let her have a moment to absorb the place on her own. Cassandra stood with her arms folded, watching from a distance. She was wearing jeans and a navy coat, her hair tied back in a low ponytail. Not the Cassandra people saw in Forbes, not the woman who closed multi-million-dollar brand deals in glass towers. Just her. Dean glanced over and nodded. "You came." Cassandra walked toward him. "I said I would." "I wasn't sure," Dean said. "Most people don't follow through on places without press coverage." "I'm not most people," Cassandra replied. Dean smiled faintly. "I'm starting to believe that." The program director introduced Cassandra to a few of the students, all between the ages of 13 and 16. Some shy, some curious. A girl named Ava tugged on Cassandra's sleeve. "Are you the woman who owns that marketing firm?" Ava asked, eyes wide. "Technically, yes," Cassandra replied. Ava looked nervous. "How do you talk to people when you're scared? Like, important people?" Cassandra froze. Then, slowly, she crouched to Ava's level and answered, "I pretend I'm not speaking to them. I speak to the version of myself who already survived the moment." Ava tilted her head. "What does that mean?" Cassandra smiled. "It means I've already been embarrassed, ignored, underestimated. And I lived through all of it. So now when I speak, I picture the girl who handled worse, and I speak for her." Ava blinked. "That's cool." "It's also true," Cassandra said. "Don't let anyone make you think confidence is magic. It's just memory." Dean had heard the whole thing. He didn't interrupt. But later, he quietly told the director to move Cassandra from guest observer to guest speaker next semester. That evening, after most of the students had left and the sun dipped below the horizon, Dean asked Cassandra if she wanted to stay for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pizza and canned soda with the night crew and a few students who had weekend privileges. She agreed. Afterward, when the last student had disappeared into the dorms, Dean invited her to walk the runway strip with him. It was quiet, cool, the night sky open above them. They reached the wing of a decommissioned trainer jet parked at the edge of the tarmac. Dean sat on it like he had 100 times before. Cassandra hesitated, then joined him, swinging her legs gently over the edge. "I used to think silence was the scariest part of my life," Cassandra said. Dean looked over at her. "And now?" she shrugged. "Now it's where I feel safest." Dean rested his hands beside him, eyes on the stars. "I think we spend a lot of our lives talking to survive. Silence is how we start to live." Cassandra turned toward him. "Is that something you figured out before or after you lost her?" Dean didn't flinch. "After," he said. "During, actually. The grief made me quiet. The silence made me hear myself." Cassandra didn't speak. She just waited. Dean exhaled slowly. "We were flying back from a design conference. She was supposed to be in a separate plane, but last minute she switched to mine, malfunction mid-air. I managed to land. She didn't." Cassandra's breath caught. "Dean." He held up a hand. "Don't soften it. I've softened it too much for too long. I blamed myself. Then I blamed the engineers. Then I blamed the weather. Then I blamed silence. Eventually, I just blamed time." She nodded slowly. "And now?" Dean looked at her. "Now I don't blame anything. I just miss her." Cassandra reached for his hand. He let her hold it. Dean leaned closer, just slightly. Close enough for her to smell the citrus of his soap. Close enough that she could feel his breath. But she pulled back, just a few inches. Not cold, not closed off, just unsure. Dean didn't push. "It's okay," Cassandra whispered. "You make me feel safe, and I don't know what to do with that." Dean smiled gently. "Then stay, until you do." She looked at him for a long time. Then, still holding his hand, she leaned her head against his shoulder. The next morning, Cassandra woke in the guest room above the hangar. Sunlight streamed in through the half-closed blinds, slicing the air into pale yellow ribbons. She sat up slowly, unsure what time it was. unsure why she felt still. She wasn't used to still. Downstairs she found a handwritten note taped to the fridge, out on the strip. "Left you coffee. Don't disappear. Dean." She smiled despite herself. The coffee was exactly how she liked it. She didn't ask how he knew. She spent the morning walking the property. Students passed by with headphones, journals, toolkits. They greeted her like she belonged. One of the girls, Ava, handed her a folded piece of paper before ducking into a classroom. It was a thank you note. Cassandra sat on the bench behind the windsock tower and read it 3 times. "Thank you for talking to the scared version of me. You made her brave. Ava." Cassandra didn't cry, but she let the feeling bloom, quietly and without shame. Meanwhile, Dean was in one of the training hangars, walking a group of parents through the year-end program stats. Someone asked about media partnerships. Dean shook his head. "We're not selling success stories. We're funding new ones." A pause. Then Dean added, "Cassandra Langley joined us this week. You won't find her name on any brochure, but your daughters will remember her a lot longer than a campaign." He didn't say it to impress. He said it because it was true. Later that afternoon, Cassandra wandered into the maintenance hangar and found Dean working on a 2-seater trainer plane. She watched him for a moment before speaking. "You always fix your own machines?" Dean nodded. "If I'm going to fly it, I want to know how it breathes." Cassandra ran her fingers along the side of the fuselage. "Teach me." Dean looked up. "What?" "I want to know what makes it breathe," Cassandra said. "Just for today." Dean smiled. He handed her a pair of gloves. For the next 2 hours, he showed her the basics: oil checks, pressure readings, flap control. She asked questions, serious ones. She listened with the intent to understand, not perform. By the time the sun dropped low enough to warm the tarmac with gold, Cassandra looked at the plane and asked, "Can we fly it?" Dean paused. "Now?" "Yes," she said. "Right now, before I talk myself out of wanting it." Dean studied her. "Not today, but one day soon." Cassandra tilted her head. "Why not now?" "Because when we go up," Dean said, "I want it to be special." Cassandra didn't argue. For once, she didn't push. Cassandra woke to the sound of wind, not the hollow kind that passed through skyscrapers. This was something different. Real, wild, unsettled wind that tugged at tree limbs and whispered along the edges of the hangar walls. She sat up in the guest room above the hangar, blinking against the soft warmth of daylight spilling through the blinds. There was a note by the door, written on a small scrap of brown paper. "Morning, take your time. When you're ready, come find me. Bring your boots, you'll see why." She smiled, pulled her hair into a low ponytail and dressed simply. Jeans, a gray sweater, boots. When she stepped outside, she didn't expect to see students already gathered. A group stood in the open air, shivering in the wind, clearly waiting for something. "What's going on?" Cassandra asked, approaching a staff member nearby. There was a scholarship finalist who couldn't make it to the last round. Dean asked if she could present today instead. He didn't want her to miss out. Cassandra looked toward the field. A girl stood alone, clutching a notebook in both hands, eyes wide with panic. "Someone was supposed to read with her," the staff member added, "but they didn't show." Cassandra didn't hesitate. She walked across the grass and knelt in front of the girl. "Hey," she said gently, "I'm Cassandra." The girl nodded. "I know. You're in the brochure." Cassandra smiled. "That's me. The cardboard version. But this one," she pointed to herself, "is just a woman who knows what it feels like to freeze up." The girl whispered, "I was supposed to read with someone." "Then read with me," Cassandra said. "I've frozen on stage more times than I've landed a punchline. I'll be right beside you." The girl's fingers loosened on the notebook. A few minutes later, the two of them stood in front of the group. Cassandra didn't lead. She followed. When the girl stumbled, she whispered the next word. When the girl looked up in fear, Cassandra nodded like the whole world was listening and loving it. Dean watched from behind the hangar door, silent, still, and something in him said, "Now." Later that morning, Cassandra found him near the trainer plane, cleaning the canopy with a rag and humming to himself. "You saw," she said. "I saw," Dean replied. "You think she'll get the scholarship?" "I think she already earned it." He handed her the thermos. "We're going up today." Cassandra's breath caught. "Are you sure?" Dean met her eyes. "I was waiting for something, and I saw it." She didn't ask what. She already knew. The takeoff was quiet, smooth, no drama. Cassandra sat beside Dean, her fingers curled loosely around the strap across her chest. She didn't grip, she didn't flinch, she just breathed. Outside, the world fell away gently. The fields below folded into neat, living lines. The road wound into the trees, the sky stretched like an open invitation. Dean's voice came over the headset. "How does it feel?" Cassandra looked out the window. "Big. Big's good." They flew in silence for a while, not awkward, just full. Finally, Cassandra spoke. "Do you ever stop being afraid something's going to pull you back down?" Dean replied, "All the time, but I get better at remembering I know how to land." She looked over at him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not rushing me, for not needing me to prove anything." Dean reached over and gently took her hand. "I wanted you to fly," he said, "but I never wanted to be the reason you fell." She blinked back a tear. "You never were." After they landed, Dean led her to a part of the property she hadn't seen before, a weathered storage hangar tucked between rows of tall trees. Inside was a workbench, a dusty old desk, and two large canvas sheets covering something. Dean pulled back the first cloth to reveal a framed blueprint. At the top, the title, Wingspan Initiative. Cassandra stared. "You've been building this?" she asked. "For years," Dean said. "Scholarships, mentorship, flight training, a national program, quietly funded, designed for kids like her." She touched the glass. "I want you to run it with me," Dean said. "Not as a figurehead, not for a headline, just as yourself." Cassandra turned to him. "What if I fail?" she whispered. "Then we fail together," Dean said. "But I don't think we will." She took a long breath. "I'm in." The launch came 2 months later. Nothing flashy, just students, donors, and parents gathered in folding chairs under a wide white tent. Cassandra stood at the podium. No slides, no media, just her. She spoke simply, honestly, about fear, about hiding, about what it means to stop performing. Dean stood at the back. When she finished, the applause was real. She stepped off the platform and walked straight to him. Without a word, she kissed him, not for effect, just because it was time. That night, they flew again. Dean in the pilot's seat, Cassandra beside him. The sky opened up like it had been waiting. Halfway through the flight, Cassandra looked over and said, "I thought flying would make me feel powerful." Dean glanced over. "And?" "It doesn't." He raised an eyebrow. "No?" She shook her head. "It makes me feel free." Dean smiled, reached over, and took her hand. "Good," he said. Do you think Cassandra deserved a second chance? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if this love story stayed with you, rate it from 1 to 10 below. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We share the kind of moments that remind us love makes life worth living.